Mr. Speaker, after 3 years of the AP and UFC in government, we have been treated to another presentation by the minister that was long on words but short on substance. In a few words, I could say that the mountain has labored and brought forth a mouse. This is the long and short of the 3 years of the AP and UFC administration. I want to touch just briefly in passing on this question of infrastructure, particularly roads, which have been mentioned by a number of speakers. Just to say, Mr. Speaker, on the government side, that $4.5 billion has been allocated to roads in various parts of the country. But there's one thing that is certain about all this talk about such huge amounts of money allocated for roads, and that is people cannot eat roads and bridges. And you have a situation in this country, Mr. Speaker, where almost on a daily basis, people are sliding more and more into poverty. Only yesterday, we saw a large number of sugar workers protesting for their daily bread, which has been denied them by this administration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even if we were to be generous and to say that there was something, however small it may be, in this budget for the common man and woman, the fact of the matter is that people have become so disillusioned, people have become so disenchanted in this country that they would not believe or even accept that there's anything in this budget for them. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, in that context, no one believes the government. There's a crisis of confidence now. Yep. Crisis of confidence. People lack total confidence in this administration. And therefore, irrespective of how well you package whatever you have, there is total disbelief on the part of the population. And that is the situation you're faced with, Mr. Speaker, the government. Mr. Speaker, the presentation by the Honorable Minister was populated with a lot of grandiose projects, most of which remain unachievable, like pies in the sky. One commentator, who the government does not like to hear much about these days, or for quite some time, is on record stating that there were over 20 initiatives in this budget and in previous budgets that remain unfulfilled. And we have very little doubt on this side of the House that the same will happen in respect to the 2019 budget. Mr. Speaker, the excruciating circumstances and conditions under which people live now in this country, I think, was clearly reflected in what the Honorable Gail Teixeira said when she spoke earlier this afternoon. And I would not wish to further elucidate on that. Simply to say, Mr. Speaker, that the budget offers no answers whatsoever to the thousands of unemployed who are walking, marching, demonstrating, and making their voices heard. There's no solution to the unemployment situation in Guyana. The budget has not mentioned a single word to this effect. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, this is another problem the government has, which it has failed to resolve. These conditions, it appears, have become a way of life for people. So much so that the government has become numb to these difficulties facing people. Many people are now decided to leave the country. Only recently, we were told that 100,000 visas were issued to Guyanese who are desirous of leaving our country. And that is a very significant statement that the government and all Guyanese ought to make note of. The U.S. Embassy said they processed more than 72,000 non-immigrant visas and 7,000 immigrant visas, people leaving the country. Mr. Speaker, this is a good example of the degree of frustration facing the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, nothing was said in the budget to address the high levels of corruption that is taking place in our country. And it boggles the mind that the government has become so numb to this criticism, constantly coming from various circles, to the effect that corruption has become a hallmark of this administration. Mr. Speaker, I think convincing arguments were made by many of the members on this side of the House about how money is flowing seeping from the system into the pockets of many of the cronies and the friends and families of the government functionaries. The Honorable Minister, in his budget speeches over the past 2 or 3 years, always resorts to the tune that it has just begun. He seems to love this song by the Carpenters. But he's gone a step further away. He's talking about, Mr. Speaker, reaching out and touch. But the question is, reaching out and touch who? And touch them with what? Is it the Midas touch? Is it the Midas touch, Mr. Speaker, that everything that the government touches transfers into something of a wasteless lump of, I don't want to use the word, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the economy clearly seems to be suffering from some kind of remission, in a period of relapse, and is drifting like a cork in the ocean. And there's a lot of daydreaming taking place on that side of the House. They're in a state of daydreaming, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and as though to contradict himself, the Honorable Minister, while speaking in glowing terms about what is happening in Guyana, in fact, not only the Minister, but many of his colleagues, admits that, quote, our institutions and systems continue to operate with a high degree of inefficiency. He stopped short of speaking about incompetence. So it's not only a question of inefficiency in the system, it's also a question of incompetence on the part of the government, unable to deliver goods and services to the people of our country. Mr. Speaker, you know, we were told that we would never find, that whenever the people in the government travels, that they would find in some of the countries that they travel to, that people would be admiring, that they would admire, by example, the quality of the roads, the maintenance of buildings and other infrastructure, the quality of the local services that are offered. He says that in his budget speech. And that the people in those countries pay their taxes. Of course they pay their taxes, but what the minister failed to mention, and we don't know what countries he's talking about in the first place. Is he talking about industrialized countries? Is he talking about developing countries? What is he talking about? Because the GDP, one has to measure what is the GDP in those countries. How much are people earning in those countries that enable them to pay the kind of taxes that are levied on them? In countries like, what are we paying here in Guyana? What are the taxes we're paying here compared to those countries who are able to spend huge amounts of money to improve their infrastructural capabilities and conditions, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, it would seem to me that Guyana's economy is on life support. But unfortunately, the government side fails to admit that this is the case. The only alternative, Mr. Speaker, appears to be a dose of euthanasia to help them. And that is why they're looking at the question of oil and gas. And incidentally, most of the people, or most of the ministers and the individuals on the government side have not said a word about oil and gas. And they're painting such a huge picture, such a rosy picture about oil and gas. Very little has been said about oil and gas.
There's no medicine of oil and gas.
I was expecting at least one or two of them to speak on the issue. The Minister of Finance in his presentation, en passant, mentioned oil and gas. But not a single one of them, having painted such a glorious picture about oil and gas and the promises it brings to the country, have not said anything about it. What is the problem? Is there a lack of capacity and understanding? Can they not explain this question to the Parliament? Something is wrong, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Finance paid a lot of attention and put a lot of emphasis on the question of growth and competitiveness, as if growth and competitiveness is the be-all and the end-all of everything in our country. He seems, Mr. Speaker, to be enamored with what I would describe as growth munching. Growth without development, growth without, you speak a lot about people-centered development. But you can have all the growth in the world, and I'm sure the Honorable Opposition Speaker will elucidate more on this. But if you have a lot of growth but not development, from which the people are benefiting, then it makes no sense whatsoever. So as one person said, you better put it in your pipe and smoke it. Mr. Speaker,
illegal, you can't smoke in public places.
Mr. Speaker, another matter I noticed in the speech of the minister, in the presentation of the minister, and in the words of those who spoke on the other side of the House, at the government benches, they seem to be surrendering the economic sovereignty of our country. You seem to be surrendering the economic sovereignty of our country. Not one speaker has spoken on this subject that, notwithstanding the fact that we want to have investors and so many others come to our country, what is important is that we must take a firm grasp of the sovereignty and particularly the economic sovereignty of our country. That is extremely important in today's world, where we are living in an international situation where there's a hostile international climate. And we have to survive. We're still price takers. And we will continue to be price takers even though we produce oil. So what will happen with the economy if we don't take full possession of it, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the government says through the Minister of Finance that they've taken tough decisions in order to right the economy that was perched precariously. Beautiful words. The economy was perched precariously when they took it over. And they had to take tough decisions. I would say yes, tough decisions, yes, but against who? These tough decisions were aimed primarily, Mr. Speaker, at the working people and the business community. Let us not leave them out, because I will come to that later on, just when I come to talk to the Minister of Public Security. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, tough decisions have been taken indeed. Heavy taxes, heavy taxations, but levied mainly against the working people of this country, those in the productive sector who produce the wealth. Penalization, as someone said earlier this morning from the side of the House, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, in trying to right the wrong, what they have done is more wrongs than rights, and messed up the entire economic and social conditions in our country. The minister admits, and I was surprised to hear that none of the speakers on that side of the government benches made mention of the fact that the minister himself admitted that Guyanese continue to face hardships. Guyanese continue to face hardships, and there are pockets of poverty in a number of areas in our country. I was expecting the ministers who spoke on that side, especially those who live in the interior areas, to refer to the pockets of poverty that still prevail in our society. But no mention was made of that. It was brushed entirely under the carpet as though it non-exists, as though we were in a utopia. It's a surreal situation. You must admit, you must reflect in what the minister said in his speech, that you have these problems still prevailing in the country. And don't create the impression that everything is hunky-dory, when in fact it is not so, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, it is not sufficient only to recognize. It is not sufficient only to recognize the problem. The question is, what are you doing about it? Well, we'll come to that later. So recognition of the problem is one thing, but doing something about it tangibly, doing something tangible about it that really, in effect, touch the people. That's what we want to talk about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you told, Mr. Speaker, also, the minister himself said this, I'm just quoting what he said, that we did not promise that a good life will be achieved in our first term. That's what he said. We did not promise that the good life would be achieved in our first term. Well, let me tell you, there wouldn't be any second term. There wouldn't be any second term. So forget this talk about first term and that we're going for a second term. There wouldn't be any. So don't count your chicken before they hatch. Don't count your chicken before they hatch.
Because you all got your Gandhi egg, man. You got Gandhi egg over there.
Mr. Speaker.
Share Gandhi egg. Nagamutu, the biggest Gandhi egg.
Mr. Speaker, it's like telling the Guyanese people, don't wait on heaven on earth. Wait until you die and then you'll go to heaven and you'll get everything there. It can't be achieved.
The Gandhi egg, nada.
So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to respectfully advise my friends, my parliamentary colleagues on that side of the House, stop this daydreaming about our first term. There wouldn't be a second. There wouldn't be a second, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance also said that we can at last reach out and touch the hope and the possibilities of our nation. We can at last reach out and touch the hopes and possibilities of our nation. We reached a stage now we're talking about hopes. We're talking about hope. So, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Speaker, hope is an illusion. Is that what you're promising the people, an illusion? We have to move beyond giving the people hope. You're in the government, we're in the opposition. Our task is to give hope to get in there, over there, and we will. We will get over there. But you have to stop giving hope. You're the government. You're controlling the purse string. Deliver the goods and services to the people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister is also quoted as saying, in fact, he boasts to this effect, quote, I can say with confidence that this is the most business-friendly administration in recent history. It's unbelievable. It's like if we're living in a surreal situation. Mr. Speaker, what a joke. What a joke, Mr. Speaker. How can this be possible? When the Minister of Finance's colleague, the Honorable Mr. Ramjatan, Mr. Speaker, is targeting the small and medium-sized businesses in our country, particularly those in the entertainment sector. Yeah, you're targeting them. You said you want to take the profits out of their business. You're a socialist now. He's not a socialist. He wants to take the profit out of the business community. Make them bankrupt. close shop.
Yeah.
That's what you're aiming for, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, how can they be business friendly? How can you be business friendly when you are targeting business people? Mr. Speaker, we were told that in the first half of 2018, the tourist arrivals in our country was 18.3% more than what they were on the previous, around the same period last year. That is approximately 347 tourists in our country. These people are coming here to have a nice time. These people are coming here to have fun with their friends and family. They're going to be going out. You want to shut shop. What are these people going to enjoy? What are they going to see? Are you anti-tourist? You can't be, you should not be anti-tourist. Allow the people to come and move about the country freely, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Yeah. Dress him down,
Mr. Speaker.
Change it tomorrow.
Mr. Speaker. And in fact, when you analyze the crime statistics, the incidents or the occurrences of crimes are not committed with the places that you're targeting. They're not committed there, Mr. Speaker. The minister's sniffing in the wrong direction.
With the dogs.
He's sniffing in... No, I didn't say that. He's sniffing... He's looking in the wrong direction. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to submit, Mr. Speaker. You know, the minister has a famous... The minister is famous on Facebook. Minister is famous on Facebook for telling people what they must haul to carry it somewhere else. But now it seems as though he's telling them, y'all catch y'all house before 2 o'clock in the morning. No. Catch your house. I don't want to say that, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the statistics with respect to robberies rarely takes place at these night spots or these locations which the minister is targeting. And the hours between which these crimes take place, Mr. Speaker, are totally out of sync with the hours that you are targeting. Most of these crimes are committed. It's a big talk now about Starbuck Market. What are you doing about Starbuck Market and those pickpockets and all those people that are around there picking the tourist pockets and selling those watches and so on under the clock, Mr. Speaker? You're trying to clear it out. You moved the mobile police station from there and took it somewhere else. Why did you do that? Mr. Speaker, the criminal activities are committed, most of them, according to the crime statistics, are committed during the daytime. And many others are committed, for the bells. The burglary and larceny cases are the most of the crimes that are committed in the evening hours and in the early morning hours. You can't give me what I have already. Mr. Speaker, it took the acting chief constable of the city constabulary to point out in a press interview that gangs of young men between the ages of 10 and 19 are wreaking havoc in the city, at the car parks, and at Starbuck Market. They call for an anti-crime plan to be implemented. What happened with the Combe plan? The president, with due respect, Combe plan, had promised to provide this house by October of this year. That report was to be presented in this house. He made that statement. We're in December now. Where is it? Yeah. The honorable opposition leader was supposed to be presented with a copy of the plan. Well, he got his. We don't have ours as yet. He said that it will be presented in October. He said in October it will be presented. He said in October it will be laid in the house. That's what he said. In October it will be laid here. Your duty, Mr. Ramjatan, Minister, is to make sure that the President fulfills that responsibility. That's your job. So, speak to the president. Mr. Speaker,
Yeah, but Parliament has
The president.
a call was made, Mr. Speaker, for the police to draw up a plan to deal with these gangs that are roaming the city. The minister has fallen short. The minister has fallen short. He has not done anything to address the situation, Mr. Speaker. And he's allowing himself to be distracted with secondary issues, noise nuisance. Deal with the real issues that affect people.
And charge.
Threat to life and limb.
And run with the,
Don't worry with noise nuisance, we can deal with that later. That's a secondary issue, Mr. Speaker.
or drinking with Clement.
Mr. Speaker, early this year, what is even worse, early this year, there was a report in the media that the schools are now penetrated with ecstasy. Ecstasy in abundance in our country, in our schools, Mr. Speaker. And, well, you must present the evidence and let us know that. But what we know, Mr. Speaker, is that this problem has become widespread and it's affecting all our schools, especially the young girls, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it's not only good to say absolutely yes. What is he doing about it? Could the minister tell this House, what concrete steps has he taken to address the gangs that are roaming the streets of the city, threatening and being harmful to tourists? That's one. Secondly, what is he doing to address the question of drugs, particularly ecstasy, penetrating our school system, the secondary schools, etc., in order to bring a halt to it? That's your responsibility. Yeah. You're receiving a big salary. You have to work for the salary.
Precisely.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the issues which I'd like the minister to address in his response. And Mr. Speaker, by the way, both Mr. Ramjata and the Honourable Minister and the Minister of Finance is on record as saying that the PPP presided over a drugs economy and that the drug trade was a false prop to an ailing economy. These are the exact words quoted from the press. But Mr. Speaker, Minister Jordan also went on to say that the private sector benefited enormously from the drug trade. Well, I would like the two gentlemen to tune in or ask for a copy of the transcript of a television interview that was made by three representatives, from the Private Sector Commission. Because the minister one time threw up his arms and said he had no more ideas. And he said
Bring in the boat.
that he was directed, in fact, I think by a cabinet meeting or a CIC meeting, they directed the minister to invite as many people as possible to consult with because he doesn't seem to have a solution to what was happening. And so what we were eventually told, that they have a study that was done by Professor Clive Thomas, 2 or 3 studies that were done by Professor Clive Thomas to prove that Guyana's economy was fed by drugs. Well, where are the studies? Where are these studies? They've never been circulated. They've never been published.
It's in the back pocket.
Well, I don't know about Starbucks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have time for that. So the man who has been put to produce these studies, listen to the linkage, is now the head of SARA, conducting a witch hunt against opposition members of the opposition. Of course, that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to pay careful attention to these matters because they resonate. They resonate in a very serious way in respect to the going-ons in the government, on the government side. And how can they, again, how can they claim to be business-friendly when you're accusing the business people of surviving as a result of the drug economy? How could you be business-friendly and you're talking at 2 ends of your mouth? You're talking at two ends of your mouth. On the one hand, you say you're business friendly. On the other hand, you're attacking the businessmen for being living off of a drug economy, Mr. Speaker. So this, of course, does not go down too well. So I recommend that they go to Plain Talk and listen to what was said on that interview. So he's not...
I'll remember you have 5 minutes remaining.
Thank you. You're not going to get all on board in that way. You're going to isolate yourself more from important sections of the population rather than being inclusive. And from what I've heard from the utterances of many of your colleagues, you appear to be more exclusive than inclusive. Because you seem to know all the answers. You seem to know all the... I don't get into that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all will not be on board if we continue in this way. And I would like to criticize publicly the minister for attacking the business community for being beneficiaries of a drug economy in our country. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister said he's having sleepless nights. He can't sleep because this prison situation is haunting him. This is what he said. This is what he said. He said, look, this thing gives me headache every night. He's crying. This thing gives me headache every